I think it's a really interesting question. And I think that essentially the distinction between somebody that is addicted or not is how detrimental it is to all of the areas in your life. So the paper that I published, I think it was in 2020 now, I looked at the American Psychiatric Association of internet addiction, and they have a list of different things that they associate with more traditional addictions, like withdrawal, tolerance, mood modification. So the kind of motivations as to why you would use these things to kind of pacify yourself, distract yourself, get your fix. And essentially, I think we can correlate our relationship with particularly social media under the lens of addiction now, if it's detrimental to your life in the areas that are outlined by the American Psychiatric Association. So I take their definition and then I apply it to everyday use, essentially. And what I've evidenced in my work is that absolutely we can see it as an addiction. I understand it's not scientifically established or determined as one yet, but we're seeing the harmful impacts of addiction, particularly for young people. Obviously, the social media ban being an example of the government, trying to start thinking about what they're going to do to address it. But yeah, that's my definition. Is essentially if it's detrimental to anything in your life, but you're not able to stop it. That's my definition of an addiction when it comes to social media. A great question. I think the issue here is that we are seeing, when it comes to young people, there's a responsibility to, of course, protect them from harm that they might be exposed to prematurely. And so I think, like, morally, ethically, also from a legislation perspective, you've got bans on alcohol consumption, for example. Anything that's also kind of falls into the camps of addictive and harmful is similarly legislated against. So that's the kind of the fundamental angle of it. We also know that young brains are more malleable and susceptible to a lack of regulation. I mean, I'm not a neuroscientist by any stretch, but the work that I've done, I have looked at it extensively. And so we know that the inability for under 24s, so not even 18, but under 24s, to regulate and have moderate relationships and moderate their relationship with addictive substances or technology is much, much harder to do so. So they're much more likely to become addicted and unable to discern when something is slipping into unhealthy, compulsive or addictive patterns. That being said, I think we're all susceptible because of the design of the platforms and the way that they are made to be addictive. That's part of the business model. It's how they're also incredibly profitable. Our attention is the economy. So really, they want our attention on the devices for as much as possible every day. And the idea that protecting only young people from that, I think, is really short-sighted. I also think that the social media ban doesn't really address the root cause of the problem. I think it's a good first step, but I think it's a bit of a band-aid for a much bigger, much deeper, darker problem, which is the design of the platforms and how addictive they are, which of course affects everybody. It's certainly cross-generational. We are not, once we're over 25 or over 18 or over 16, thinking about the ban, excluded from experiencing those harms. But I think it's more of like a frontline, let's focus on protecting minors first, and then look at the wider harms. But you can see from obviously what's happened in the US with the latest judgments around addictive by design platforms, social media platforms, and how it's harmed mental health. I believe the plaintiff was 23 in the one that was successful against YouTube and Meta, I believe it was. So that's quite a big step forward to recognizing it's not just young people that get addicted and the harms occur, it's everybody. But I think it's just a kind of I think it's a bit of a band-aid. I think it's also a bit of a move by the government to be seen to be doing more than they actually should be doing. Great question. And I actually did a keynote on this the week before last on, how should we be, if the government aren't going to step in and legislate against addictive by design harms, and if they're not going to protect people from doing so, there's an enforcement gap, obviously, that's now kind of evolved through this process of recognizing the harms and then seeing the gaps that are enabled or not able to be filled by the DMA, by the European Commission and Ofcom and Online Safety Act and so on. So yes, could collective actions fill that gap? I think it's a really interesting question. I'm a bit hesitant to advocate for that because I think that it shouldn't be falling on consumers to protect themselves from the tech giants who profit and make incredible amounts of money at such a large population health scale harm. That should be coming from the government and from the regulators. That being said, we know that they haven't kept pace with innovation. Look at AI and so on, and the rollout in other areas of kind of medicine and NHS, public healthcare, and so on. So could it be a mechanism? It's an interesting one because the collective actions regime doesn't work on consumer harms in terms of like mental health harms. It's anti-competitive harms, the Competition Appeal Tribunal, which is the only court in the UK that enables the collective action regime. So it's not something at the moment which would be able to have a consumer harm in terms of mental health harms, addiction harms. They wouldn't be able to be brought under the current regime, the current tribunal, because it doesn't fall within their remit of anti-competitive behaviours. Whether the tribunal should be expanded to include consumer harms, I think is a really interesting question. And there would be big cases that could come forward through it to address the harms of that. Damage-based cases, which the Competition Appeal Tribunal is challenged by mental health harms and health harms because it's hard to quantify the damage. So that's another limitation of the regime. So I don't know what that would look like in practice in terms of how you quantify the harms in terms of a monetary value, but it has happened in the US. So maybe we follow from there. Yes. So I think digital detox is really problematic as a concept because I think it doesn't address the fact that the platforms are designed to be addictive. So therefore, the responsibility is put almost entirely onto an individual sense of self-discipline or self-responsibility, which is incredibly harmful, to our own sense of self and well-being and kind of moral worth. If I can't build a good relationship with my device, it's my fault and therefore my problem. And it also removes the responsibility of the platforms because of the addictive by design nature of these tools. So I think that this idea of digital detox is really limited. I think it's good to be aware of your own relationship with it and your own habits and behaviors, and to obviously have time away from the screen, particularly first thing in the morning and last thing at night. But I think this idea that we should be the ones managing it is really, it doesn't acknowledge the kind of platform capitalism that we live within, and the issues that presents to us. So I think it's something to be mindful of, but we need to have better regulation around the addicted by design nature of the platforms because it's just it's placing too much responsibility on individuals, and I think that's harmful.